Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author, Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Julia Heaberlin. Julia is the international best-selling author of 6 thrillers, including Night Will Find You, We Are All the Same in the Dark, Paper Ghosts, and Black-Eyed Susans. Her books have sold in more than 20 countries. We Are All the Same in the Dark won the 2020 Writers League of Texas Award for Fiction, and Paper Ghosts was a finalist for Best Hardcover Novel at the International Thriller Awards. Before writing novels, Heaberlin was a journalist for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the Dallas Morning News, and the Detroit News, which fed her interest in true crime and the forgotten stories of victims, a theme she carries into her fiction. She currently lives in the Dallas-Fort Worth area with her family, where she's working on her next psychological thriller. Welcome, Julie. It's so good to have you.
Oh, it's so good to be here. Thanks for that great introduction. You're a pretty talented and prolific author yourself.
Well, thank you for that. I discovered you with We Are All the Same in the Dark, which I adored. And so I was so excited and honored to get a copy of Night Will Find You and then to have this chance to talk to you. So before we delve into all sorts of interesting things, can you tell our listeners about Night Will Find You?
Night Will Find You is about a brilliant young astrophysicist and reluctant psychic who gets pulled into the case of a missing girl in Fort Worth by one of her best friends. Chaos ensues. She becomes a target of a conspiracy theorist podcaster, among other things. But with my books, I always like there to be another layer of research. And that comes from my, I guess, journalist background. And so in this case, it was astrophysics, but also this idea of the space between the truth and the unknown. So that kind of rounds it up. I investigated conspiracy theories and psychic phenomenon and all that kind of stuff.
And it's so interesting. And I love the fact that she lives between the sort of most intensely scientific world, right? And then this world that is largely oftentimes at odds with science, with the sort of this, the psychic, the supernatural, these phenomenon. And I love that because it's such an inherent conflict in her character. So I want to talk a little bit about the research because, I mean, there's some pretty wonderful research done in this book. And obviously you must be a really talented researcher because I don't know how you put it all together. But first, do you remember the inspiration for the story, where it came from?
Well, oddly enough, a friend of mine who's a journalist, she'd like a shout out, Sherry Jacobson. She told me that I needed to put a crazy podcaster into my next novel, and that it should, this person should resemble Alex Jones. So she just shot tons of articles at me, did a lot of my research for me about Alex Jones, and would not give up on this idea. But then I realized I didn't really want to write in the voice of a character like that. I like my characters to be warm and likable and women. And So basically, Alex Jones led me to the conspiracy theories, to the psychic phenomenon, to the unknown, to creating Vivi, who I wanted to be this, as you said, very complex character, sort of half Skulder, half Mully, if I can make a Scully and Mulder, half of each. If you get the X-Files reference, you probably do. I don't know if everybody will. So that's what occurred, and she led the way.
I love that. Well, and it is, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying about not having, and the podcast is like another layer. It isn't, the story, you do this incredible thing where you've just layered on all these aspects of story here. And the podcast is a big part of the story, but it's not the meat of it either. I mean, you have so many things that contribute to the sort of the beauty of this book, which I love. So the research, are you an astrophysicist? I just maybe should ask that right
Oh,
now.
absolutely not. Please do not ask me any questions on that topic. But I knew enough to write the book. And in the past, with Black Eyed Susans, I used a mitochondrial DNA expert who worked at 9/11. With We Are All the Same in the Dark, I interviewed an ocularist and young girls who had lost their eyes, so I'd have a good idea of what that was like. And in this book, I was lucky enough that my consultant was in my family. So I have a cousin who's a rocket scientist, and we used to walk the beach and do treasure hunts. And, he mostly, we would occasionally muse about God and things like that. But during this book, I emailed him, and then he offered up another astrophysicist friend of his, Tom Ricketson, and they would just answer all my emails with beautiful detail. And Vivi would not exist without their beautiful minds helping me, not just about the science, but about, philosophy, their own belief in God, which, to be stereotypical, I was a little surprised about. But my cousin, being scientist, this is what you think, right? And my cousin just said, every day I ask myself, how did God make this thing? That is the question he asked himself, which I thought was kind of beautiful. So, they gave me their ideas of heaven. They talked about Elon Musk, who they both worked with. It was just a wonderful experience. And in some ways, the best part of it was me really getting to know my cousin, who is equally introverted as I am, but in emails, we share all.
I love that. Well, and I do think I love that there's a stereotype here that we do have in our heads that if you are a firm believer in science, it's really hard to find a comfortable union with religion. And the idea that the people do both, of course we do, because we're all sort of contradictions, a million contradictions in one body. I love that you learned that, and that you shared that in the book. And it does make Vivi very, very, layered and nuanced, and she is very likable, and she's a very strong woman, which, obviously that is why we're here. We're talking about women. So, in your last book, We Are All the Same in the Dark, the story also deals sort of with people who are deeply damaged by their past, some, of their own doing, and some sort of just because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Can you talk about what about that resonates for you, and sort of, is that something that shows up in your other books?
Yeah, I would definitely say that's part of the DNA of my books. I want to give a voice to the victims, and for the victims to not be victims, but the heroes of their own story. So I think that's kind of true across the board in my books. In Black Eyed Susans, she was a young woman, 16, when she was found in a pile of bones, the survivor of a serial killer. In Paper Ghosts, you have a woman who takes to the road with a serial killer who's an old man, possibly demented, to find out if he killed her sister. And We Are All the Same in the Dark, those characters, those women are all missing a physical piece of themselves, and gave me this just crazy, beautiful idea of what beauty really is. And the same in the case of this book. She's very conflicted about, her passion for science and these girls who haunt her. And yet the two things are, battling within her all the time. And yet they kind of melt like butter together as well. I mean, science is magic. I mean, look at a cell phone. You can call your grandmother from the beach, or text her from the beach in Italy, or, whatever. How could we imagine that? Yeah. And science could not exist without this, meeting of imagination and this desire to seek the unknown. And so how far that goes, and the people we think are a little crazy for what they believe, that is because I think we all believe in something we can't prove, that other people might think wishful thinking, a little crazy, that was just a coincidence. But in reality, we believe we, saw our mother as a monarch butterfly, right, or whatever it might be.
Right. I love that. No, I think that is so powerful and so true. And I also think, isn't it, I mean, even as authors, there is a little bit of, you can call it crazy or magic, or some spiritual connection. I feel like that the people ask how you write a book, and obviously one word at a time, but the way the sort of ideas synthesize and the characters synthesize, it's almost impossible to take full credit for that, right, on your own. It feels like there
Absolutely.
is some sort of higher power that's at work. And the same, I think, can be said for whoever, people that put together the cell phone or the, a rocket ship, or Elon Musk. There's crazy in sort of genius or genius activities, right? All feels, it's a fine line, I think.
It is. You can't explain it. People ask how you write a book, right? And you say, I don't really know, but I sit down and it comes out. These things inside me, helpful, spirits, who knows what it is, but it is absolutely magic.
Yeah, it is absolutely
when
magic.
It works. When it works.
I know, right? That's an important qualifier, because when it doesn't work, it's pure torture. But that's probably part of the magic too, right?
Right.
You say, you have this beautiful quote, which I have a lot. I'd like to tab sort of my favorite spots in books, and so every once in a while I pull one out. But you have this. We're talking about Vivi's sister and her old friend Mike, and I love. She says, "Do we always have to sacrifice, regret one thing for another?" What do you think?
I kind of think we do. As sad as that may be. I mean, I look back on my life and think, well, if I'd done this, would I have been able to do this? And the answer is generally absolutely not. We take these paths. We decide where we're going to go. I remember my mother used to be fascinated by Elizabeth Taylor and how her life was these deep dips and these high highs, deep dips, high highs.
Yeah.
And so if she had not had the deep dips, I don't think she could have had the high highs. She was just a risk taker and, very passionate about who she loved at the time. But I mean, I don't know if that exactly gets what you're getting at, but to me, these are just choices that we make.
Well, I think it's, I mean, obviously it's true for everyone, but it's particularly true, I think, for women, right? Because I don't know, when I was young, it was that, the Angleterre commercial or Ginete, where you could, bring home the bacon fried up in a pan. So the idea was a woman can do everything. Not
right.
anything, but everything. Like you could be the mom and the breadwinner and still make a meal and still look whatever. And that is because we've sort of increasingly acknowledged that is not possible, right?
Right. And that would be the case with me. I didn't have a second child, wasn't able to have a second child, but I think would this book stuff have happened, would I have written books without it, because I have a hereditary heart condition. So there's just a limited amount of energy that I can put into something. Now, would I sacrifice the book for another child? Probably, but it turned out pretty good.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's absolutely right. I think that is true. Something has to give, and I'm glad you're protecting your heart. And I'm glad you've written your books, although I completely understand also that's not an easy choice here. So there's the
hard thing though is kind of interesting. Wait, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, please.
No, the hard thing is kind of interesting in that a woman saved my life. I had a hereditary condition, was overdosed on some medication. My husband and I were out to dinner in Detroit, and we were not intending to go to dinner that night. We were going to go, leaf peeking in Michigan. And we ended up in this restaurant, seated by a table with a nurse and her family. They lived, I don't know, 150 miles away. They had come to Detroit to the theater and out to dinner. And I passed out there, and she saved my life because I was overdosed on this medication. So I have to think there was something there. She wasn't necessarily supposed to be there, or she wouldn't usually be there. And I was not supposed to be there. So how did this magic happen?
That is exactly right. It does feel like you think about the number of, things that could have happened to prevent the alignment of her and you in that same place. I mean, going back to the idea that how our parents met, or our parents' parents, if just there'd been one sort of slipped moment where the things didn't go quite that way, right? I think that
Exactly. You can
is,
apply it to lots of things.
you can apply it to lots and lots of things. Well, let's talk about, you made an interesting comment that I want to sort of delve into. It wasn't, it was when we were sort of emailing back and forth about the book, and you said, you know, you do write these incredibly strong women and multifaceted and not, I think universally resonant. I mean, I feel like they're not, I mean, aside from the astrophysics, which obviously, you know, that doesn't exactly resonate for me, but the fact that Vivi has got all these sort of, you know, she's got real insecurities as well as being obviously super brilliant. You said that you never write violence against women on the page. So your books are, I mean, I'm going to say this as a compliment. Your books are dark. There's real, you know, there's really deep violence and issues, but never on the page. So tell us about that, because that's unusual in our genre, I think.
Yeah, it's I like it to be more understood. I kind of have that Alfred Hitchcock philosophy that you're more scared by what you don't see exactly and what is in your imagination. But I also just have a philosophy that we should not be writing graphic rape scenes and torture scenes with women in them. I find them to be, some of them to be just practically like snuff films. It makes me uncomfortable to read it. And it's become normalized, I think, in our genre. And, you know, I get especially irritated when I see best-selling men, you know, write these scenes for other men. And I just think it just continues this, you know, whatever it is in our heads that is primal that direction. And I don't know, I just can't do it. And I can't read it on the page either. And I don't think people should do it. I mean, women have done this as well. I'm not just, you know, upset with men, but I do think it's just not right.
Because in some way you think it perpetuates actual violence against women. If we sort of normalize it, then we're no longer sort of, there's no longer the real understanding of what kind of horrors actually happen in the world.
Right. It's just more titillation than anything else. And, you know, I don't think that young men should be reading that. I mean, I read a story recently where young men were more likely to choke young women they were sleeping with, you know, from bars or whatever. And I wonder, where does this come from? It comes from all of society, all of this being seen on television. You know, why does a camera have to pan over a beautiful woman's naked body on an autopsy table? Yeah. You know, that is there for reasons other than, you know, actually, you know, improving the story.
Yes.
It puts the story along, makes you horrified, but there are ways to make readers horrified without that.
Right. And like you said,
imagine being a mother who had lost a daughter and then have that just, you know, in her face all the time.
Yeah, it's true. That, I mean, that is the unthinkable, right? What happens to this, that is horrifying to hear that men, yeah, there's a lot of things in the world that right now that are truly horrifying, Julia, don't you think?
Yes, I do. And there always have been. I
know.
Found that out even more, you know, researching this book. The conspiracy theories have existed forever, that it's not all part of our dysfunctional era. We just, you know, it's like a wildfire with social media. And
yes, the 24-hour news cycle, all that stuff is so well, let's talk about Texas, because I think that's an interesting, you know, of course, I'm in Montana, which also gets a horrible rap. And we've just recently outlawed TikTok. We'll see how that works. But there's a lot of things, obviously, in this state that I don't agree with. But I really appreciate the way you sort of talk about Texas. I mean, in a way, there's one sort of, you actually posted it on social media that was like a picture of a Hummer with like some liberal bumper stickers and also some other, and it was just like, you're like, this is my Texas. And I love that, because I do think what we hear about Texas obviously is less positive, but there's a Texas out there to really, really love. And it sounds like you love it.
I do love Texas. I kind of wear it as a second skin. I feel very similarly about, you know, as you do, about some of the tragedies happening in our politics here. But at the same time, it is a beautiful, diverse state of 29 million people who don't agree with everything, and most of whom don't vote. That's the sad part of how we've arrived at this place. But I grew up here. It's just part of me. I feel it a little bit of my mission to defend it, because it is certainly not, it's not the Texas I see from, you know, MSNBC commentators even, you know, it is something much broader and more beautiful. And the people are that way too, many of them. And in a way, it's the fourth most diverse state in the union. And there is, you know, a tolerance of some kind that I don't find in, say, you know, necessarily Vermont or someplace else, which is, you know, much more hyper liberal. It's interesting. You have to come here and live here to understand it, maybe. But
well, I mean, I think that and there's obviously, you have an incredible, you know, group of authors down there. You know, I know Meg Gardner's down there, and Don Bentley, and lots of incredible folks.
So Kent.
There's a bunch. So I unlike Montana, which is a million, only like a million people ish, and no diversity whatsoever, at least not ethnic and racial diversity. Lots of obviously socioeconomic diversity. But I love that. Because I think I have a stereotype in my brain about Texans, right?
Of course you do.
Fed from MSNBC or whatever.
Yes.
Right. And yet, I think that's,
and some
really
of it's true, unfortunately.
But just like, you know, it's just like science and religion. It's not either or. It's, you know, it's either and if, you know. It's just there's just a lot of different aspects of it. You can't just look at it one way, which I really appreciate, being reminded that whatever I've got planted in my head is probably only a part of the story, right?
A part of the story. There's a very hot literary scene here. Incredible art institutions, just so many languages spoken. It's just not the picture that you see on television.
Right. No, I think that is good. I like to hear that. And I will visit. I have not been there other than to fly through. But it's definitely, like you said, it's a big state. So I had to get myself down there. Okay. There's a
Big Bend, especially, where Vivi, you know, has her mountaintop hideaway with telescopes looking at the sky.
That place is magical. And that is not at all how I picture Texas, right? In my mind, it's just flat, the whole thing.
So and there's, you know, there are evergreens in East Texas, and then the huge desert portion, and then lots of flat also. But it's and then you know, the mountains of El Paso. It's just very diverse in every way. So
well, that is exactly right. And I love that. And I love the way you do that with some humor. And I appreciate that. I think sometimes we learn things better when it's delivered with a little bit of humor. So,
and I try to slide my opinion in there as well.
Well, you know,
I think social commentary.
I think that's fair too. I mean, that's the power of a story, right? Oftentimes a story opens our eyes to things that we wouldn't otherwise see. It's sort of the idea that a man who reads lives 1,000 lives, and a man who doesn't read lives one. Because I think that's what we get. And it's why I love to talk, you know, to women who are writing. I'm a huge, obviously a voracious reader. And I do think it opens up worlds I would otherwise never see. So, and you do a beautiful job with that on all counts, Julia. I mean, really fascinating. So I'm so grateful to you and your stories. It sounds like I got some to catch up on, but I do want to talk about this beautiful passage about that is when she's in that room, and I'm gonna get this wrong. Sharp is in the room lying on the floor, right? And she says, he's lying. I actually use this as my quote of the week. I don't know if you caught that on Instagram. I do a quote.
See that.
I do a quote of the week, and I love this, and I need to share it again, because I think it is so important to sort of recognize that from a very early point, women have a certain outlook about the world, and we have to. You know, we're trained, you know, socially, especially sounds like now more men are strangling women. So I guess we have to even pay more attention.
Well, that was a that was just an essay I read of a
Totally,
one woman's
totally.
experience. But, you know, I mean, I found it interesting.
It is
that
so
was her
interesting.
experience.
Right. It makes you sort of super not interested in ever dating.
Yes.
Okay, so Sharp is a character I love too. So it's not to say that you're like Mike and Sharp, who are the sort of male police officers in the story, are also wonderfully and well drawn characters. So it's a lovely thing. It's I focus on the women and the characters, and they are the protagonists in your stories, which I really love. But those men are beautifully drawn, full of their own internal conflicts and hard and soft and all the things too, which I think is, it's sometimes hard not to want to sort of like, I mean, we get our podcast guy who seems, I'm sure he's multidimensional, but the side of him we see is sort of the unattractive conspiracy theory bully side. But those men are beautifully drawn. So and Sharp is particularly, you have to read the book to see why we like Sharp so much. So, but Sharp is lying on the floor and she says, the book says, he's lying on the floor, face up, grimacing to get a better view of his project. He must trust me or not think much of my chances against him. His Adam's apple, which looks permanently sunburned, is right there for me to jab with a nail. Does he know that almost every woman past 16 thinks like this without thinking? That when I walked in this pantry an hour and a half ago, I immediately considered that the WD-40 in the dog's cubbyhole could be as good as mace. That situational awareness is an itchy second skin. That if women like me acted on every defensive thought in our heads, there would be a lot fewer bad men left. And I love that because I think it's something that I've started to sort of think about, that we're really young when this starts to happen to us, right? When there's a sort of shift in the way that we are looked at. And it's usually before we're prepared to be that way in the world. We're prepubescent or almost prepubescent, and before we sort of have developed our minds fully to know we have to sort of be aware of certain situations.
Yeah, and I think, when we're born, as we move through even childhood, our brothers and fathers are seen as our protectors. We're not seen as the protectors of them necessarily. And then we send our daughters off to college with pepper spray and, panic buttons that scream. And so this is just this, as you said, it's just from the beginning, in my opinion. And, I don't really know what the answer is to that, because, a young girl in great shape running in the dark on a road is simply not in as much danger as a man who's maybe less physically fit running on that same road. So, one little mistake.
Yeah, she's in more danger.
Right.
Yeah, she's in danger. Right, exactly. Yeah, that is true. And I don't know how to do it either. I have a 23-year-old daughter, and it's something I think about a lot. So it is terrifying. It's a terrifying, and now with there's just a million other reasons to be terrified. So it is. I think it's a very true aspect of us. I don't know what the answer is either. We'll have to keep spreading the awareness of it. Maybe that's the first step, right? This thing happens and it shouldn't happen. And, how do we stop it? So, but I love reading that because I think that's empowering to women to know it's not just you. It's not just you that feels this way. It is every woman feels this way at one point or another. Cross the street, or catch up with somebody on the street who looks safe because there's somebody else who doesn't, that kind of thing. Walk into a store or whatever. So
and then we all have these experiences that are not positive with men. And my roommate in college was raped by someone she knew, and that was just a horrible thing for her, obviously, to go through, but also traumatizing for me as well. He came to the door the next day and banged on the door and screamed, "I did not rape you," because she had told somebody that it happened. This just this confusion about what is yes and what is no. It just seems like it's going to exist forever. So.
I think so too. I mean, that's the advice I gave to my son. I was like, you just never have sex with somebody the first time unless you're both stone cold sober, because it's like, it just, if you really like her, there's time, and you don't, because, you know, if she's not 100% in, you know, you guys want to both be like level-headed about it. I mean, I think
Yeah,
that's true.
that's terrific advice to a
Yeah,
son.
it's, I mean, I think you know, and it's for his protection, but it's also because he has the upper hand, you know, physically, and um, you know, you never want to, I mean, I imagine that would, if you actually did, if you were the kid who had sex with a girl and found out she didn't want it when you thought she did, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming that happens occasionally, then that would be a
Sure.
horrible thing to live with, right? That would be a
Right.
horrible thing to live with. So not worth it. That's all I can say. Not worth it. Um, well, this is, I mean, Julia, this book is wonderful. I enjoyed it so much, and it
Oh, you're
really,
so kind. Thank
I
you.
didn't. I was, you know, I was so in love with We're All the Same in the Dark. I thought, how can she possibly do it again? And she has. So, um, Julia
I always
Heaberlin.
think, how can I write another book? Don't you? Yeah.
Yes. Every time
Much
I'm
less,
like,
how can you write another good book? Who knows how it's going to turn out? When you're finished, you don't even know, right?
not until somebody else really tells you, right? I mean, it's just too close to it. Well, you know, I interviewed Sandra Brown, and she was so wonderful. She said every time, I mean, you know, she's got what, like 90 something New York Times bestsellers. And she said every time she starts a book, she's like, I don't think I can do this. I don't. And I thought, well, if Sandra feels that way, then we're all in good shape
Right.
to feel that way, right? But tell us, Julie, what is next? What are you working on? Don't you hate that question? You're like, I just have a book out, and you already want to know when my next book is out. But I do want to know. Can you share a little?
So this is the first time ever that I didn't know exactly what I wanted to write. So I had two ideas. So I started writing 10,000 words of one and 10,000 words of another. And
Wow.
I couldn't decide. So I just decided to go one way. Hopefully it's the right choice. But again, female protagonist. She's an emergency room doctor, like my son and his girlfriend are. So I have, again, family consultants helping me on this. And she and four other very different strangers receive a letter that indicates they'll receive a lot of money if they meet together and work together to solve the case of a missing girl. This is basically all they know when they meet, and they're very different people. One is a cashier, one is a cop, one owns a bar, and so the question is, why these people?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they pulled together? And what is their connection to this case they've never heard of? And of course, there are connections, which you will have to read about and I will have to think about for the next 6 months. So,
Yes.
but anyway, but right now, just trying to move through the promotion of this book,
Yes.
which I know, I don't know how you feel about that, but the self-promotion is so difficult. So you make
It
it
is.
easy. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Well, this is, I would happily promote anybody's book but my own. I'm so much more comfortable talking about other people's stories. So I completely
I
understand
saw
that.
your
Well,
daughter interview you. She was great.
thank you. Yeah,
Yes,
that
as
was
were
really,
you.
oh, thanks. Well, that was really, really fun. She's a total sweetheart. So, yeah. And she was so tickled because she was like, you know, when your kids are proud of you, it's such a like, it just
Oh,
feels
you could
really,
tell. Yes.
yeah, it's so moving. So, well, I have to believe this is going to be so well received. It's such a wonderful, wonderful story, Julie. And you haven't read Julia Heaberlin, you have to, because she is just incredible. And I'm so grateful to get a chance to talk to you about Night Will Find You and Livy. And I can't wait to read the story about the four strangers, because that also sounds, whatever you write, Julia, I'm in. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure. This has been Killer Women with Julia Heaberlin, and Night Will Find You. Do not miss this one, and we will see you next time. Bye.